Okay, I think we're going to go ahead and get started here. Welcome to the 2021 Annual Business Meeting of the Association of Midwest Museums. I am Charity Counts, the Executive Director of AMM. We are based in Indianapolis, the ancestral homelands of the Miami, Delaware, Potawatomi, Shawnee, Wee, and Kickapoo communities. Today's meeting features brief reports and board elections, followed by a discussion with Midwestern museum leaders about the reflections on the disruptions of the past year, the opportunities presented, and how they are managing change. Before we begin, I want to share a couple housekeeping notes. First, you should have received an email from us with the agenda and attachments, such as the board roster. These documents will be referenced during today's meeting, but don't worry if you don't have them. You'll also see snippets from those documents in our slideshow, which I'll start here momentarily. You can see a snippet of the agenda on my screen. Second, I want to call attention to a few aspects of today's broadcast. The webinar is being recorded and will be shared via YouTube as soon as possible after today's live event. We are offering ASL interpretation today. Zoom allows each viewer to pin the interpreter to a standard location on their screen in each of the different views. To do this, right-click on the ASL interpreter's video and select Pin Video. We've also turned on, better make sure I've got this live transcript enabled. We've also turned on Zoom's built-in live transcription software. To turn on closed captions, click the CC button in the menu at the bottom of your Zoom window. We'll do our best to speak loudly and clearly so that everyone has the best experience possible, and Zoom's AI can keep up. We encourage you to use the chat feature anytime today to interact with each other and any of our board members and panelists. We will use the Q&A function for the panel discussion later in the program. Finally, we'd love to find out where you're joining us from today before we launch into the business. Please take a moment to respond to our poll, which I'll put on the screen here in a moment. We'll give you about 30 seconds to respond to this poll. Let us know where you're from. And if you're outside the region, there's an option for you. We guess you're joining us because you're a Midwesterner at heart. Okay, I'm gonna stop the poll. Here are the results. Looks like we have a lot of folks joining us from Illinois and Michigan, but all states represented. Welcome. All right, let's get started. I would like to now turn it over to Leslie Wright, Director of the Grinnell College Museum of Art, to offer welcome remarks and call this meeting officially to order.
Okay, now I'm not muted. Greetings and congratulations on being here today, on making it through a year like no other, and one that was especially peculiar for those of us used to being in a physical space, sharing experiences in person with our audiences. Due to a raft of unexpected circumstances, we had to change, and change we did. I have a colleague who's an archivist. He was telling me recently that he likes archival work because he needn't face actual change, just its aftermath. I would argue that archival and museum work prepares us better for change. We may like the quiet, steady work behind the scenes, but all the while we're absorbing lessons on how to cope with upheavals. We know that change tends to happen in spurts, driven by crises like pandemics. It calls on us to step out of the quiet, steady work that in fact gives us a foundation for finding new solutions and paths to succeed and connect. As we will hear today, museums across the Midwest were able to lean into change because they knew their content so well. My archivist friend does have a point that change can be hard because we have to leave things or people behind. The pandemic has shown us that we also get to add new exciting opportunities. I recently read some advice from someone at a professional juncture in her career. She stated, "Don't say farewell, say fare forward. Make change exhilarating, not fearful." Many of us are in the business of preserving the past, but even our views about the past and what we preserve are changing in the wake of the racial awakening of 2020. Diving into change can mean opening up to new possibilities, even about the past. When we fare forward, we open new spaces and places to others to tell their stories, expanding the past. With this meeting, I step out of the role as AMM president and hand it over to a wonderfully capable colleague, Katie Van Allen. Virtual work for AMM has brought me closer to a host of Midwest museum professionals I probably wouldn't have met or gotten to know without this great disruption. I'd like to commend the AMM board for all their hard work this past year. We added great new board members, dived into strategic planning, and with the leadership of the amazing Charity Counts, provided opportunities and resources for Midwest museum professionals to continue to thrive and grow. At the end of the calendar year, I will also retire as director of the Grinnell College Museum of Art, a rather large change that I am slowly embracing. I'm certainly thinking a lot about how to make this next step exhilarating and not scary, both for me and my staff, as this will be the first major leadership change for our young museum. One of my motivations for retiring is to strengthen our museum profession. There will not be room for new museum leaders drawn from a wider demographic if we don't think carefully about how our personal career decisions impact others. If we can't let go, we keep doors closed to colleagues who may bring different life experience and new perspectives to our institutions and our field. As I step down, I challenge us all to use change to build engagement, to revise old habits, and to wrestle with new ideas. I urge you to lean on AMM and its resources to process all that has happened recently and to energize you for whatever comes next. In other words, fare forward. I now call the 2021 annual business meeting of the Association of Midwest Museums to order. Our first order of business is the approval of minutes. Katie Van Allen, our secretary for a few more minutes, will present the 2020 annual meeting minutes. Katie.
Thank you, Leslie, and good afternoon, everyone from St. Louis. As Charity mentioned, you should all have received an email notification with the agenda, as well as a copy of the minutes from our 2020 annual business meeting held last year on Zoom. Thank you all for being there and for being here again today. Are there any corrections to the minutes as distributed? If so, please comment in the chat. I will give it just a second. I think the chat so far is lots of hellos from all over the Midwest, which is wonderful to see. Okay, I am seeing none. Since there are no corrections, I move to approve the motion, the minutes as distributed, excuse me. Would anyone like to second the motion, please?
I'll second. This is Whitney.
Thank you, Whitney. All those in favor of approving, please select yes in the poll that Charity is now going to put on screen. Those opposed, please select no. Perfect. Thank you, Charity. The magic of Zoom. We'll give that just a second. Apologies that I don't have any Jeopardy-like theme music to play while we gather these votes.
Something to work on for the future. Give a couple more seconds for anybody who hasn't voted yet. All right, Katie, I'm going to share the results.
Perfect, thank you. Lovely. Thank you all for voting. The 2020 annual meeting minutes are approved. And now with that official business out of the way, I will move pass the mic to Cheryl Dar, my neighbor at the Magic House in St. Louis, for the treasurer's report. Thank you.
Thanks, Katie. So like many of you, we have experienced the loss of program and membership revenue in the past year related to the pandemic and its impact on the museum sector. You can see the slide that on the screen that shows you the 2020 financials compared to the 2019. In 2020, our total assets decreased by 36%, primarily due to the cancellation of our annual conference. We did experience some member attrition, but not as much as anticipated, thanks to the gift membership campaign. This allowed us to donate 52 institutional memberships. Thanks to the constant growth from 2016 through 2019, from the support of our community through memberships, annual fund contributions, and sponsorships, we were able to sustain operations in spite of the losses in 2020. We appreciate any and all of you who renewed your memberships to support AMM in the past year. In 2020, we welcomed 233 members to our community, including institutions and staff members. This year, we continue to see new members and have welcomed 75 members since January 1st. Please join me in a round of applause to welcome all our new members. I also want to acknowledge that our staff, board members, and partners have taken steps in the past year to identify new opportunities to serve the Midwest museums and sustain AMM through careful spending, creative partnerships, and a mix of free and paid programming. Among these collaborations is the Digital Empowerment Program, technology and digital media training for small museums funded by a national leadership grant for the museums from the Institution of Museum and Library Services. While the majority of the grant goes directly to the program implementation costs for the Museum Learning Hub, a portion of the grant awarded supports AMM operating, a crucial source of support for AMM during this very difficult year. Thank you to IMLS as always, and to all of you for your support and participation in AMM. If you have any questions, Charity and I are happy to answer them in the chat, so we can keep this business meeting short. So just please text us a note. But up next is Jennifer Scott, our Vice President with recognition.
Thank you, Cheryl. Thank you everyone for joining us today. Good to be with you virtually. To echo Cheryl's comments, we are very appreciative of IMLS, our members, and others whose support was critical to AMM's viability in the past year. I'd like to take a few minutes to recognize several that have not yet been mentioned. First, thank you to everyone who has pledged support or contributed to the AMM annual fund in the past year. This includes our patron members and George R. Fox Society members. Contributions in 2020 total $13,728, and we have already received over $2,800 in 2021. Next, we would like to thank our corporate sponsors and organizational partners whose support in the past year made AMM programs possible. In particular, we wish to acknowledge all of our regional and technology partners on the Digital Empowerment Project. Catalog It for supporting our virtual awards program. We are excited for the virtual community celebrations model to carry forward to 2021 and future years, and appreciate your support for this experimental format during the pandemic. Hub International for their support for programming during the pandemic, including the PPP 2.0 partnership with ACAP and the Loan Source earlier this year. IUPUI's American Sign Language Department. Our collaboration with student interpreters and faculty has helped to ensure our programs are more inclusive and opened our eyes to best practices and opportunities for improvement in the future. The Wisconsin Historical Society, IUPUI Museum Studies Program, and all of the organizations and museum professionals, we thank you, who collaborated with us on virtual programs. It has been a real pleasure to feature and learn from all of your work. Last but not least, we would like to recognize our friends at Mutual of America. Mutual of America signed on as a benefits provider just before the pandemic in 2020 and has supported the Midwest community in a variety of ways in the past year. We are especially grateful for their sponsorship of today's program and the upcoming museum leadership series. Please join me in a round of applause to welcome Troy Johnson, Senior Regional Vice President for Field Consulting Services at Mutual of America, to offer remarks.
Well, thank you, Jennifer. Good afternoon, everyone. Again, my name is Troy Johnson with Mutual of America, and I manage our operations in Minneapolis and Milwaukee and work with our clients throughout the upper Midwest. And Mutual of America is certainly very happy to be a sponsor of the annual business meeting today. Mutual of America is a leading provider of retirement plan services across the United States. But I would say we are especially proud of our work with many of the leading cultural institutions and museums across the Midwest. In addition, we are happy to be a preferred provider of retirement plan services for members of AMM. If you are not a client or have questions about your organization's retirement program, we would love the chance to speak with you. And real quick, I just want to remind everyone of the upcoming lunchtime leadership chats that we are sponsoring as well. These will be great opportunities to hear from your colleagues on topics such as talent recruitment, post-pandemic fundraising strategies, and planning for retirement. More to come on this later in the meeting from Charity. Again, we are pleased to help support AMM and our museum clients across the Midwest. Thank you very much.
Hello, everybody. I'm Charles Katzenmeyer from the Field Museum in Chicago. As chair of the nominating committee, I'm excited to share with you our 2021 candidates for the AMM Board of Directors. First, let's introduce our new board candidates. Nominees, please say hello when your names are read. Members, please refer to the bios and rosters that were sent to you by email. Danny Gonzalez from the Indiana Historical Society in Indianapolis.
Hello.
Thank you, Danny. Hathaway Miranda from the Nelson Atkins Museum of Art in Kansas City, Missouri.
Hello.
And Dr. Charles Wash from the National Afro-American Museum and Cultural Center in Wilberforce, Ohio.
Hello, everyone.
That worked out so well. Thank you, everyone. In addition to new board candidates, we've also presented a new slate of officers and have one at-large board member up for term renewal. Katie Van Allen from the Missouri Historical Society in St. Louis is nominated for the role of president through July 2023. Ben Garcia from the Ohio History Connection in Columbus, Ohio is nominated for the role of vice president through July 2023. Kate Koczynski from the Grand Rapids Public Museum is nominated for the role of secretary through July 2023. And Leslie Wright is proposed to serve for 1 year through July 2022 as immediate past president. Also, Jennifer Scott is up for re-election as an at-large board member through July 2024. I now move to elect Danny Gonzalez, Hathaway Miranda, and Dr. Charles Wash for the board at large, elect Katie Van Allen as president, elect Ben Garcia as vice president, elect Kate Koczynski as secretary, and re-elect Jennifer Scott for an additional term as an at-large member. Would anyone like to second this motion?
I will, Cheryl.
Thank you, Cheryl. Because this meeting is virtual, all members in attendance will be casting votes via an online poll, and we will tally those votes with those that have been submitted online in advance. Charity will open the poll on screen now. I'll take a brief second to have you reply. All those in favor of the roster as presented, please select yes. Those opposed, select no. And now, Charity, would you share the tally when you have that ready?
Give everybody a moment for any last votes here. Okay, I know that our board members were unable to vote because they're on as panelists right now, but voted in advance. And in addition to advance votes submitted from members via our survey, it looks like 49 in favor and 0 opposed.
Oh, that's a great relief. Thank you, Charity. Excellent. Please join me, if you would, in a virtual round of applause to welcome our new and returning board members and officers. And thank you all.
Charity, you're muted if you're on.
Yeah, sorry, I just had to close some things out on my screen. Sorry about that. All right. Give me one moment here. So this is the time for the director's report, and normally we, share a long list of things. I'm going to change it up a little bit today. For about 18 months now, which is hard not to look at the last year as 18 months instead of just the past year. So forgive me, I'm going to do that today. Every time somebody has asked me, how are you? I feel like I've always responded, I can't complain. And there are reasons why, there are many reasons why. And they say a picture is worth 1,000 words. So rather than list all the reasons why I'm still feeling pretty good after a difficult year, I have a short video for you highlighting many of them. So give me a moment to get this going. I hope that video played for everybody. Okay, great. So thank you, as the slide said at the end there, to everyone who contributed to the programs and events of the past year and more. I hope to see you at the upcoming lunchtime leadership chats in August, part of the Mutual of America Museum Leadership Series. Soon we'll be announcing a few pop-up gatherings at museums in the region as part of this series. In November, we'll be hosting Museums Evolving 2.0, our virtual conference with Wisconsin Federation of Museums, who I refer to at this point our long-term relationship. They've been working with us for a few years now, trying to make conferences happen. So we're excited to get to host you this fall, November 1st through the 5th. Don't miss this year's speaker and session lineup, including Cinnamon Catlin Legetko, Chris Taylor, and Vu Lei, founder of nonprofitaf.com. Finally, watch for announcements about this year's awards and conference scholarship programs, both coming soon. This year's awards program will follow last year's community celebrations model and will feature a new category focused on the diversity, equity, access, and inclusion work underway at museums in the region. Regarding conference scholarships, we have at least 5 to award this year already and are funding more. So thank you and stay tuned. And now I'd like to turn over our program to Whitney for today's panel discussion.
Thanks, Charity. Hi, everybody. I'm Whitney Owens. I'm Chief Learning Officer for Cincinnati Museum Center here in Ohio, and I'm also a board member for AMM. And I'm really delighted to be with you today. We have a really wonderful panel of presidents and CEOs from around the Midwest to help us think through and process together what it's been like to lead change this past year, both what the challenges have been, but also what we'll take forward. And I want to acknowledge that the change in the past year hasn't just been COVID, of course. There's been a nationwide racial awakening. I think many of us, if not all of us, have dealt with layoffs in our own institutions and questions about the nature of museum work going forward, wage equity, and other issues critical to our field. So when we think about the changes over the past year and everything that we've moved through, we'll be talking and thinking about change broadly. I'd like to introduce our panel. They all hold the role of executive director or president and CEO of their institutions. They're from a range of museums across our Midwest region. So we are joined by Billy Ocasio from the National Museum of Puerto Rican Arts and Culture in Chicago, Illinois, one of my hometowns. We're joined also by Ricki Levine from the Holland Museum in Holland, Michigan. Christian Greer from Michigan Science Center in Michigan. Mary Bauer from the Evansville Museum in Indiana, and Patti Sherman-Cisler from the Jewish Museum in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. So welcome to all of you. And I'm going to throw out a few questions we discussed in our preparation, and then we'll open the floor. So please feel free to chime in, and if we're quiet a little too long, I'll just start calling on you. All right, first, thinking broadly again about all the changes that we've seen over this past year. What are some of the changes that you've made and led at your own institutions that you are hoping that will keep moving forward? Different variation of this question is thinking about our external audiences also. Externally, in what ways do your audiences and or donors see you differently that you hope will continue? Again, the floor is open for our panel.
I'll start. Hi, everyone. So great to be here. I think there were so many changes, first from a technology standpoint, and we realized that we could reach a much broader audience. So our virtual audience was 7 times what we normally bring into the museum. And certainly from all over the state, nationally, and even internationally. Many of those converted into members. So obviously that is something we are contemplating and looking into, but and trying to decide how much we will remain virtual, which will be some. Secondly, we doubled down on our commitment to social justice. I think we became a go-to place in certainly the Jewish museum world and in some other niches as a place to really discuss what was going on and how we could be active in that space.
I'm happy to jump in there too, and I totally agree with the technology and the reach. We found that we were finding audiences that have never been to the museum, not because they're necessarily not that far, but because of any kind of barriers, whether it be disabilities or weather or something else that would have normally kept them away. So that was a big improvement for us that I think we will continue in some format. And then the social justice I'm right with Patti on that too. It's something we've been doing a lot of work on. It's been part of our strategic plan that we put in place several years ago, but to be able to double down on that in terms of some of the programming that we've done and to make it represent really what's happening in our own communities as we speak at the same time, I think was something that, there's no going back from, and it's something that we continue to move forward with.
I'll just jump in here and say that, yeah, I think anything virtual was something that we're going to keep. We weren't prepared to do any of that. And I think that all of the new technology that we learned is something that's very important in the way for us to continue using it in the future. I think that a lot of things that changed among us was just the perspective that people had about museums. Whether they liked them or not, they found a new way of a new appreciation for museums, I would say. When it comes to social justice issues, it was a way for us to bring together artists and be able to get that message out. I think that, I spent 20 years as a politician, and people don't really trust politicians, but they trust the arts. And when artists are able to name it, to paint it, to sing it, those issues, people tend to pay attention. And so I thought it brought a whole new perspective to our world.
I will add that one of the things that we took on at the Michigan Science Center here in Detroit was our internal structure. And I think when we start to think about the concept of trust or taking on new community engagement strategies, social justice issues, equity within your organization, a lot of this is a function of how well you work together and collaborate internally. What your focus areas are, how you determine how responsive you will be, how agile you need to be, and where leadership focuses on responsibility and accountability across your positions. One of the biggest hits that I think just about everybody took, not everybody, but was to the staffing. We went down to a third of the staffing that we had. We've been trying to ramp back up slowly, but we're ramping up differently than we normally would. We're bringing on people with different skills and retaining people with multiple skills. I think some of you can relate. But the most important thing is trying to figure out, for us at least, how are we going to work? Is there a new way of working, or are we back to trying to solve new problems with the same old tools? So that was the approach that we did at the Michigan Science Center that we definitely want to keep.
I agree with Christian. We've had the same challenges in Evansville at our museum. And I do want to add that we look to our own community and to the other institutions, all the cultural institutions in our community. And we have collaborated on a number of projects in the last 18 months. And it's made our collaboration within our region and specifically our community much stronger.
Excellent, thank you all. Hearing your responses, it's clear that this past year was anything but business as usual. And I wonder if you might think about getting a little bit more specific on what's a risk that you took over the past year that you felt was right? Again, floor is open.
I think every day you woke up, there was a risk. I mean, you didn't know what was right, what was wrong, what was changing, what new guidelines from the CDC or state that you had to follow. But in terms of real risks that I think are a way for us to continue to move forward, and I'll circle back to the social justice piece of it as well. A lot of organizations, mine included, made statements after George Floyd was murdered. And I think that reinforced in the community where we stood and where we're going. And that's a risk in this small conservative community that the Holland Museum is in. And we've got pushback from it, no doubt about it. But we also had a different audience that realized where we were going or where we were headed and wanted to join forces with us. So I think in the long run, it was the right thing to do, regardless of whether or not we had additional reinforcement for our cause or not. But it was definitely a risk for our community to take or to take in our community, and one that we feel is empowering us as we move forward.
Yeah, I'd like to second that. You know, when some specifics of the kinds of programs we did show that, you know, at least our museum was no longer neutral. So some of the programs included a VP of the Milwaukee Bucks, which I have to say, go Bucks. But the Bucks were instrumental in the social justice movement here in Milwaukee. So we had the vice president come on and talk about their works in the social justice realm. We have a talk tonight about how the word is passed and talking about the African-American experience and institutionalized privilege. We had lawyers on who are doing suing the people who were involved in Charlottesville. So those kinds of programs clearly showed that we had a bent towards some of these issues, where in the past, I think we would have been a little more careful.
I think my risk was more about kind of speaking out as well. I took a risk in kind of challenging corporations and foundations to be more equitable in their giving. I thought that was very important. I think that, you know, in communities of color, museums of color, we don't have the millionaires on our boards. We don't have those endowment funds, and I thought it was the right time for us to speak up and just challenge and kind of bring awareness to our work as well. You know, and I thought that was risk taker, but it also started a lot of discussions, started a lot of dialogue, and I thought most of it was very positive. So, and I think a lot of them reacted in the correct way.
Well, one of the risks that we took was to be open. We opened on July 10th, which was less than 100 days from our closure at the Michigan Science Center, and that was pretty bold. I would like to say that we did that just because we were trying to prove something that you could be open as a hands-on science center, which we did prove and we believed. But I really, to be quite honest, with a bunch of leaders in the room, just to tell you, I reopened because I was worried about us losing relevancy, that maybe people wouldn't think we were as needed, as important. And I thought if we stayed in the public eye while other facilities and opportunities were closed, we could get more attention and raise our profile and demonstrate our public value. But it was extremely challenging to do that. Luckily, knock on wood, because we're going back into this, but we had 0 cases internally or cases traced to us of COVID-19, strict protocols, and we operated for that, for over a year. So it was a real big risk. The board had concerns, but the team stuck together and decided we were going to do it and do something challenging, which was really important.
Or a risk of another kind that we took was reevaluating just about every program and exhibition that we had scheduled and canceled and reorganized. And the team really had to cooperate to say, our budget is nowhere near what we anticipated and may not be for certainly 2021 and possibly some of 2022. And we had to come together and make some difficult decisions about how we would reopen and what we would be presenting in terms of exhibitions and programs. So I applaud our staff and our board for working through some challenging decisions.
Excellent. And Billy, your comments about challenging inequity and philanthropy made me think about VULE. So I'll just throw that plug in there for AMM's virtual conference with Vu as the closing speaker. He blogs a lot about that, but I know many of us are aware of. Thinking like museum folk, if a historian from the future looked back at this time, what do you think they'll note as a fundamental change for the museum industry as a whole? And what do we think all of this massive change at once on multiple fronts and some of the chaos that resulted? That's been negative in many ways, but it's also made a lot of things possible. So what do we think has fundamentally changed this time, and what has all that change potentially made possible?
I'll start. We had a little bit of this discussion behind the scenes in preparation for this, but when we talk about change, there's change in terms of like something that's consistent, and then there's or constant, and there's change that's accelerating. And I think we were definitely in an accelerating change scenario these last 18 months, where one thing after another just kept happening. It just and I'm starting to learn to be comfortable with chaos at this level, which is something that, as a person who ran summer camp at museums for a number of years, chaos is not a big deal, on the programmatic side, but you just on the leadership side, it gets scary. How you determine who's on staff and which positions are going to be furloughed, or what new people you need to bring on board, or just managing your board. So I think people will look back at this moment in time, maybe with this idea that we learned how to be more agile.
I would add that, if a historian were to look back, I think they would see that maybe it was a break that we kind of needed. And I say that because I think that during the regular years, we're so busy running around, we're so busy getting this done and that done. But I think that this allowed us some time to reflect on what we've done and kind of think about the future and plan for the future. I thought that, I found more time to also focus on things that I needed to focus on, things that I've always wanted to do, and yet never had the time to really look into it and get it done. So I think that those things were very important, coming up with new ideas, brainstorming. I thought that, although we went virtual and then we did a lot of programming for educators and for parents, I thought it also gave us that time to kind of like take another look, take a step back and look again as far as who we are and where we want to go.
I think that also happened externally. I think the value of arts and cultural organizations, museums, as well as other organizations, came to the forefront in a lot of people's minds because they were in lockdown. And in some cases, even when things started opening up, people chose not to go out. So where were they getting their cultural fix? What were they doing? And as museums, so many of us pivoted in so many ways to make things virtual, whether it was programs or exhibits, or in our case, we did walking tours virtually where people can do them themselves. I think the value of arts and cultural organizations just elevated to another point, because I think a lot of people don't realize how important they are in their day-to-day lives until there's that possibility that we won't exist. I mean, one of our annual appeal kind of conversations is some of the statistics of what the potential was for museums across the country to not make it. And I think that motivated some people to see the value, whether they changed their behavior with their checkbook or just became more involved in some other level. I think there was a variety, but I think that was a big change. And I hope that actually is something that will be sustainable.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you, Ricki. I think people, even people who maybe aren't museum goers, understood or got exposed to how museums are relevant. and how they're relevant to today. I know a lot of museums, ourselves included, ask people to share their COVID stories. And we collected them and we shared them with the broad public. I also think funders, we found funders that normally didn't fund us because they understood that it was so important that that kind of information, the kind of information we all share, be available to a broad public.
I would just bring up something that I thought was interesting as the government support that many of us received through the PPP loan, any tax credits that you got, or SVOG from the Small Business Association. Gosh, I wish we could get that every year. I mean, I don't know, I don't know about many of us, but we don't receive any public dollars. And I remember as a kid, Whitney will appreciate this. Growing up in Chicago, all of the museums in the park were free. You could walk right in and go to the Adler Planetarium, as I did, and get inspired to do cool things. And that accessibility piece is very important. If you have a millage or some kind of tax levy where you have the opportunity for people from all parts of your community to be able to join you. And I think both fortunately and unfortunately, we've gotten more business savvy over the years. We've learned how to generate our own revenue and do events in our facilities and charge for different programs like camps, for example. And so our business models have shifted more to revenue generating in a lot of ways. But I still think that accessibility component, especially with some of the engagement we want to do, might benefit from more opportunities for people to connect without necessarily having to go through a paywall or to do, to pay a general admission. I know it's a pipe dream, but I'm just throwing that out there.
Well, here in Milwaukee, at least, Christian, speaking of government funding, there was a real push for advocacy, and the museums joined together. And we were successful in getting the state to use some of the national funds for our arts and culture. And now the city of Milwaukee is hearing from all of us. So, and Wisconsin Humanities received federal funds. So I really, really hope that there's a real look at what I consider the responsibility of some of our governmental institutions to fund our museums so that all people can come and all people can see and learn.
I agree with Patti, and I do want to say that Indiana Arts Commission, Indiana Humanities have been very, very helpful with supporting institutions of all sizes within our state.
Right, we've put that out there into the universe so it can happen. Sustained and significant funding for arts and cultural organizations. I like it. When we were talking a bit last week as we were preparing for this panel, I heard many of you mention just how important your network has been these past 18 months. And certainly as the board of trustees for AMM, we talk a lot about the importance of the AMM network and how we can make that valuable to our members. So if you could speak just for a minute, the panel, about what has been the value of your network over the past 18 months, and how has it or how is it changing the trajectory of your own thinking, also of your organization's thinking, and even the thinking around your community when you think of your local networks within your own community?
I'll jump in. I have to say that one of the more silver linings, I guess, in all of this was that I had an opportunity to meet great people like you from around the country and in some cases through Aztec around the world. And, it's interesting as a freshman CEO coming in to a role, been in museums a long time, but never at this level, and things are slightly different, maybe more than slightly. But I didn't feel like I was alone at all. And it almost felt for me, only 7 or 8 months into the job, like I was part of a cohort or cadre model that you would get in a graduate program or some extended learning. opportunity. And boy, was that valuable. I mean, I think I'll look back on this and say just seeing so many other CEOs with way more experience than me were having some of the same problems and similar discussions in their organizations. And it made us feel like we were one group just trying to keep our field alive, keep people focused, and build hope for the future. I was happy to be a part of it.
On a local level, we had a group of executive directors of cultural organizations within our community, but like I said before, it's gotten much stronger, and we have tried and successfully cross-programmed with each of these organizations. The Philharmonic has played at the museum. The museum has had traveling or touring shows to other institutions in our region. So the local group has gotten much stronger. And I do want to comment again on what Christian said. The national organizations, Aztec and AAM and the Midwest Conference have been great throughout all of this, so that you could get on and learn and share about what other institutions in the area are doing. It's been a great support.
Yeah, on the local level, what we have is a really strong nonprofit association alliance. And so that was incredibly helpful to hear what other, not outside of the arts and cultural venues were doing, you know, the social justice organizations or the health and welfare kind of organizations, because some of the same tools that we were all going after for the PPP loans, or what are the guidelines from the state or the CDC, those were all things that we were able to share and brainstorm. And like Christian said, you know, with the network within the museum organizations and then the networks with other arts and cultural organizations, this was just another layer of resources and information. And I wouldn't know necessarily what to do always unless I had this group to talk to or pick up the phone or Zoom meetings, which we had regularly to just kind of brainstorm and check on each other. And at the same time, we were dealing with a lot of the social justice conversations too. So it wasn't just about the mechanics of how to apply for some substantial support, but it was also, what are you doing? What can I support your work? How can you support mine? And so there was a lot of sharing of information on so many different levels. And I don't know how we would have existed without that.
Yeah, I absolutely, again, agree with Ricki. I think we have a group of museums that we've been collaborating and sharing information for maybe 3 years now here in Milwaukee, but it accelerated during COVID. And, you know, what are your protocols? When are you opening? You know, all those sorts of things. How's your membership doing? What are you doing to keep your membership? What does your programming look like? That was all so important. And then we were very lucky. The Council of Jewish Museums partnered with the European Jewish Museums, where we made some contacts. And we were able to put together a program called the Virtual Passport and give behind the scenes tours of, you know, in Russia and London and Argentina, Israel, all over the world, South Africa, which turned into an earned revenue opportunity for us, but also a really nice opportunity to get to know those museums and maybe look into partnerships down the road.
I think that, you know, one, we grew our network in ways that we didn't think of. And not only did we get new visitors, not only did we get to meet people from other states and other countries and those sorts of things, but it grew our network within the community and things that we always wanted to do and just never could do it. So for instance, let me give you an example. So we had a lot of the social unrest that was going on. And so small businesses, especially those small businesses within communities of color, never have the time to engage with other things. And so like with artists and museums and those sorts. They just don't have that time. But what we did was that, you know, during the social unrest, a lot of them started to board up their businesses, and we said, oh, well, what are you guys doing here? And so what we did was we got together a group of artists, and I've been trying to do a public artwork for some time, and it just happened. We got a bunch of artists together, we sent them out, and we asked all the businesses, can we at least paint murals with positive messages about the social justice that's going on? And so it brought them together, and businesses started to also understand what the issues were. And I thought that was just a great way for people to just come together and have a discussion.
That's wonderful. I love the very hopeful vision that all of those networks present. Thank you for sharing that. And for those in our audience, if you want to drop any questions that you have for our panel, either into the Q&A or into the chat, we can address them as we have time here. Almost all of you referenced change both in your staff structure and also in your staff culture during these past 18 months. And if you could just share what some of that change in culture and structure has been, and also what still needs to change as we move through and past this past 18 months.
So for the structure part, obviously when we were in lockdown, everybody was working virtually. And as we were able to reopen, and we reopened the museum, we didn't reopen our historical homes, but we reopened one of our locations in July, slowly. And we still kept a very staggered work structure. So those people that had to be at the museum when we were open were absolutely here, but other people were staggered. And that actually opened up my eyes, and I think everybody else, on how effective they were, what worked for them individually or as a department. Could they work on their own virtually? Were they more effective that way? Some people work better in isolation. Other people's need that, coffee clutch time or that water cooler time to really engage with one another. And so as we were reopening up and figuring out, again, based on the state guidelines of essential services and who had to be here, who hadn't, when that was completely open, I made sure that each of our staff and I had a conversation, what worked for them and what worked for the organization. And so what has continued is that not everybody is on site 5 days a week. We're not open 5 days a week. So that's a help in that respect. But even those people that would normally be here every day of the week don't necessarily have to be here. That's going to continue to evolve, I think, as people feel more comfortable or as people feel that they're being more productive in a certain way than they weren't before, or they didn't have that knowledge of knowing that they could be that productive. I know for me personally, I don't come in every day because I am much more productive when I work from home without the disruptions and the interruptions that you will get when you have other people here that might think twice before coming into your office and just send you a note instead. Technology has changed that as well. We have Teams, we use Teams, and that has been super effective for us. So I think there's still a lot more transition to go. I think there's also, what's going to happen with this variant and how are we all going to have to adapt to that as well. But I wanted my staff to feel like they were being valued and respected, and whatever they needed for their personal lives as well as for their professional lives was something that we were able to adapt to as much as possible.
I think that we seem to think at this point, optimistically, hopefully, we're through this or nearly through this, but I'm not sure we quite are. And I mentioned last week, and I think after 18 months of, we downsize our staff, our full-time and our part-time staff. We're not open fully as we were before COVID. And I think at this stage, we see a lot of stress in the staff. Some people are back at work. Some people are still in a hybrid situation of working from home and working on site. But I think it's a challenge for me and our other leadership in the staff to really see where people are, because I know it's an extremely stressful time when you're not quite sure you're through the challenge.
We were able to keep our staff, we're a small staff, so we are all retained our jobs, so though there were no raises. But I think the key word, and we talked about this a lot, the panelists, was adaptability. And having to learn new skills and take on new roles. Our archivist did not have the amount of work he had if we were open. So he took on writing and doing all the behind the scenes on our weekly e-blast. Our curator learned how to curate an exhibit online. Our education director put together a 3 times weekly museum moment where we highlighted something from the archives or an exhibit on Facebook Live, and then lives in our YouTube. So it's just amazing all the different roles people had to take on that weren't traditional. And I think going forward, we have to really think about that, find out what worked for them, what worked for the organization, and what do we look like going forward, short-term and long-term.
I think one of the things I learned was how to better prioritize and not overwhelm the staff during this whole COVID thing. And I say that because sometimes we give so many different projects, so many to-do lists and those sorts of things. But I also had staff that was like here alone, that didn't have that support network, and that, we're going through some sorts of depression, and I had to be very careful not to overwhelm them and give them 2 or 3 things and say, hey, let's work on these for now. We'll come back, regroup. But it was something that I learned to do because I was on that goal. And not everybody has a good support system, and not everybody takes being locked up for a year the same way.
I think that's a challenge, as some have mentioned, with people looking to their left and their right and seeing what other people are doing. So the folks that were able to work from home because their jobs required them to do things like writing grants versus working on exhibits and that sort of thing, it created a different kind of equity issue as well internally. Some of it was probably, like most of it was perception versus the reality of what was happening, because obviously from my position, I'm checking in with people every day that maybe other staff didn't see. So maybe there could have been a better way to communicate some of that. But then at the same time, I'm thinking, mind your own business, like work on your projects rather than be on your neighbors, but there's a balancing act somewhere in there from either extreme of, how do you get people to focus on what they're doing, but also feel as though, we're sharing the load together, which is sometimes challenging as well. And I feel that from a leadership standpoint, I know that there's a lot of responsibility on our shoulders to be able to maintain an even keel emotionally. And so you're digging out your best emotional intelligence stature to deal with all this. But I hope this doesn't happen, but I feel like at some point I'm just going to drop, like maybe once everything kind of comes back to normal, and if there is a normal or new normal, and what kinds of supports do we need for us who've been carrying that emotional load of everyone, during this period as things normalize.
Yeah, Whitney, if I can just circle back too on the network piece, because that was super helpful for me to help figure out where my staff was emotionally and how they were dealing with the stress. And I actually, there was one event that I had some staff participating on, I was on, and the keynote was asking people to rate what their battery life was. And I noticed that one of my staff members put her battery life at 25%, and I had no idea. So of course that raised flags, and I circled back to her later, and we had long conversations, and we talked about what she needed to do for herself and her health, her mental health, physical health before anything else. And so that network, you know, kicked in for that, in that regard as well.
Great, and I'm going to pull a related question from the chat from Jennifer. What did you learn from your staff at this time that you were unaware of before or understood in a different way? Heard a little bit about staff learning from each other or from outside folks in terms of technical skills. Patti mentioned that as they were picking up new skills and things, and thinking about how you learned about mental health from staff. Are there other things that your staff helped you understand, or just the chaos of the time and change nature of work helped you understand that you didn't before this time?
One of the things we found out was that Zooming in, or being on Teams all the time was not the same as, we had lost a connection. You know, there was no longer really that camaraderie. We didn't know what was going on in their personal lives necessarily, which may affect how they're working or treating each other. And I can't remember which staff member, but they're like, why don't we just get together? So we did. We'd meet in the park. And instead of having a staff meeting, just, you know, have a beverage and catch up and learn what was going on in each of our lives. And that was really helpful and healing.
I think we certainly learned, I've learned about people's work styles and how, and some people have been tremendously productive working offsite or working from home, and others have found it a big challenge. And sometimes it's surprising, or it was a surprise to me of the people who were the most successful working from home. So.
Great. As we start to come to the end of our time, we'll do one or two more questions. One of the things that I'm wondering is, as the leaders of your organization, having led your organizations through 18 months of incredible change, what is a key question that you're left with as we move into the next 18 months, whatever they may bring? And this might be about the nature of museums or your work or leadership or your own institutions, but what's a big question that you're left with, and how are you leading into it going forward?
I think there are more questions than answers. I mean, this was so upending. What does it mean as far as our programming? What does it mean about virtual versus in-house? What does it mean about the roles of the staff? I mean, taking time to really collect and think about that information and share with each other is going to take some time. We're going into some long-term planning and opportunities assessment, where hopefully we can really dig in to some of those questions, not too quickly, because I think we all have to decompress and we all have to process. But yeah, I'm anxious to hear people's thoughts on this.
Yeah, and I totally agree, Patti. I think one of my big questions is our role in the community, our role as an arts and cultural organization in this small community. How does that play out? I know where we hope we're going with our strategic plan, but will that play out differently now because of this disruption that we've all had? And the other part of it too is we're embarking on an interpretive planning process too. And that probably would have happened anyway, but I think with this awareness, with this knowledge of what's gone on in the world, we'll change all that. So there's more questions than answers for sure.
My question is really, you know, if you've ever heard someone say, stay in your lane, I'm trying to figure out what my lane is. We've been all over the road, you know, trying to catch be anti-racist, trying to address community issues, trying to do a lot of these things. And, eventually we'll learn how to put our signal on and gently, go from, but I think some of us are like student drivers, like trying to figure out, like, where do we want to go? How fast should we go? How carefully should we go? Do you tell the kids in the back seat that they don't be quiet, you're going to pull over this car? Or what? I mean, how does it work? So I think that's the challenge that I have right now is trying to figure out where we're supposed to be and what lane we're in. And I know all this will shake out eventually. And I know there's a lot of great work that has to be done. And things like structural racism and other equity issues seep into organizations. Sometimes organizations are built around these things from the board on down. This isn't going anywhere anytime soon, but we do need to learn how to be better drivers.
I love that. And I think it goes back to what is essential and what is essential for our museum and our work as museum professionals. And I agree with Ricki that it needs to have a lens of your community and what is your place in the community? What can you do for the community? And I think that our institution is really looking at that now.
Excellent. Christian Greer, you were always king of the metaphor, and I appreciate you for it. Thank you all. Thank you to all of our leaders, to Billy, to Ricki, to Christian, to Mary, and to Patti for sharing your wisdom and experience with us today, giving us good questions to ponder as we move forward into whatever the next 18 months holds for us. And thanks for giving us some juicy questions to ponder potentially an AMM programming over the next year. That is helpful as well. This brings our panel to an end, and I'm thrilled to turn it back over to Katie Van Allen, who's going to close us out.
Thank you, Whitney, and thank you for moderating our session today. Really appreciate your time, and I'll add my thanks to yours, to the panelists today for their candor, insights, their realness, all they've shared about where they've been, where we're heading. Well, it's been said before and was said today, this truly is a transformational moment for museums, for all of us, as we know, both in our inner workings and in how we work with and for the communities we serve and are a part of. Ricki said we're living in a world where every decision we make holds some risks, and Christian talked about living in a new level of chaos. In the midst of all that, I think AMM is a place that continues to be a place where we support one another, share our joys, our frustrations, place to find inspiration, courage, and people to lean on along the way. And so it's those reasons that I'm so happy and proud to be part of this organization. These networks and relationships we've created are more important than ever, as I think was also demonstrated today. Charity's video and the comments reminded me how wonderful the community truly is, why I'm a proud museum person, why I know all of you are proud museum people. And I'm glad we're on this journey together, whatever the rest of 2021 will bring. Look forward to seeing you all again in November for our virtual conference, if not before. And I also want to thank Leslie for her time here as our president these last couple of years. Your leadership and wisdom is always appreciated. And I will close with your own words. It's fair forward, not farewell. Our meeting is adjourned for 2021, and I hope you all have a great rest of the summer. Thank you.